Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the 37th edition of Munich Film Festival. My name is Sofia Glasl. I'm one of the programmers, and I'm really happy you joined us here this afternoon for this, I'm pretty sure, delightful talk with Mads Brügger. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Sofia, and thank you everyone for being here. Guten Tag.
We just had, last night we had your premiere of Cold Case Hammershot, which was as delightful as the Q&A afterwards. I'm not sure if there's people from the screening in here, if you still have questions, because the Q&A went on for quite some time and we had to break it off. Feel free to jump in. We've installed a mic in the middle. You'll have to walk up to that because we're live streaming the talk online, so your voice will also be transmitted. So feel free to jump in at any point of the talk. Maybe, Mads, to start off our conversation, maybe you want to talk about, well, you started as a journalist and then became a filmmaker. Maybe you want to walk us through how long had you been working as a journalist after, before you started making films?
Well, for quite a while, or journalism is the trade of my family. My parents, both of them were journalists. My father was the editor at a Danish business newspaper, and my mother was a journalist at Denmark's biggest tabloid newspaper. And that was in the heydays or the golden era of Danish journalism. Newspapers were making a lot of money back then. That is not the case now. But I grew up amongst journalists, and at a quite early age, in my late teens, I began practicing journalism as well. I took part in publishing, editing and publishing underground magazines. One of them contained a 30-page long, a long read story, which I wrote about. It was based on in the Autobahn Raststelle. You could buy this map called Liebe an der Autobahn, which was a guide to brothels and places only for men along the Autobahn. And me and my friends, we more or less, visited most of the places on the map and had some very crazy experiences. Especially a place called the Landhaus mit Pfiff, which I would definitely recommend going to. Yeah.
Do you know whether this still exists?
I presume, I don't know, but that was really weird. Yeah.
And at which point in your journalistic career did you decide you also wanted to make films? Because your films obviously live off your experience as a journalist. Well,
initially and for a long while, I was doing radio documentary at Danish Broadcasting Corporation, working with in feature-length formats, which is a great training for if you want to move into documentaries with finally pictures. And at a certain point, I crossed into to television, and in 2004, I did a project called Danes for Bush, where me and a colleague drove across America, working for we were pretending to be Danish neoconservatives, working for the re-election of George W. Bush, because Denmark was a part of the coalition of the willing. So we thought, why not go and lend a helping hand? And that was like also a crash course for me in identity play, and I discovered a lot of the do's and don'ts of identity play while doing that project. And afterwards in Denmark, it was aired as a 4-part segment. It wasn't obvious when you saw the series if we were for real or not. because I wanted it to be as if the Republicans would see the series, they would say, well, that's how it played out. We were never out of character. So we had a lot of interesting hate and fan mail. A lot of hate mail about how bad English we spoke, and about me spending a lot of our campaign money in Las Vegas on cocktails and strippers. It was part of my Republican persona. And but then we also had fan mails from one of he was one of the most famous members of the Danish version of Alternative for Deutschland. He wrote us a letter thanking us for what a great work we're doing. And actually the series also inspired some Swedish conservatives to do a real Swedes for Bush. But that afterwards, I felt quite happy about it. But then a friend of mine said, "But making fun of Americans is very easy, what do you actually risk yourself by doing this?" And he also said, "You are exploiting something very nice about America, that you can drive around and talk to people as you please, and you can even participate in an electoral process without anyone hindering that." So I thought, is there a place in the world where role play is the order of the day, and where you cannot go around filming as you choose? And I quickly realized that would have to be a dictatorship, which led me to North Korea. And so I did a project called The Red Chapel, where I went to North Korea with 2 Danish-Korean comedians, one of whom is a self-proclaimed spastic, to showcase Danish comedy. And it evolved into something very quite horrific and disturbing. And afterwards, it was aired in Denmark again as I think this time a 3-part segment, broadcasted in the month of December on Fridays. If the only people watching television on Fridays in December are people who are not invited to Christmas lunches, where most Danes go to get very drunk. So the ones who are at home are really, aggressive and boring people. And they were very angry about this series, and Danish broadcasting had a lot of complaints about it. So it was considered a complete failure. But luckily, my producer, whom I was working with back then, he left Danish broadcasting to Centropa, Lars von Trier's production company, and we discussed doing a feature-length version of this North Korean project, The Red Chapel, and soon after it premiered at Nordic Panorama, and then at Sundance, and then my film career began.
So in a way, well, you not really stumbled into that, but that developed organically out of your previous work.
Very organically, yes.
Because that would have been my question. Identity play, so to speak, has always been part of your way of making films. Have you ever thought, because of your journalistic background, making like a regular documentary without the humorous parts of identity play?
Yes, actually, and I am not advocating, for all journalism to be identity play, and a lot of the journalism I have done in Denmark is fairly conventional. But at one point in time, I decided, to explore the edges of journalism, what you call, edge work, and as a way of, having a holiday from regular journalism. My first project was going in Denmark in a small hamlet called Svendborg. Every year there is an international convention for clowns, and I decided to go undercover as a clown I thought it would be interesting because clowns are undercover already, so I would be undercover. And it was an enormously interesting experiment. And actually, the cliche about clowns crying on the inside really is true, because clowns have major problems. And they would never have told me about these problems if I had been a non-clown. So even though it is, using undercover as a method against clowns seems morally questionable, but it actually makes sense.
So what are the problems clowns usually have?
Well, many of them were recovering from being drug users. Many of them were abused as children and young people. There were several rape survivors. It was like a little shop of horrors. Yeah.
And what do you think is the advantage of your way of identity play in your films in terms of talking about Red Chapel, exposing in a way hierarchies and political systems?
Well, it does make sense if you are exploring phenomenons, environments where traditional journalism is not possible or not allowed. A country such as North Korea, obviously, but also a country such as the Central African Republic. If you would go there as a conventional working journalist saying, I want to expose neocolonialism and systemic corruption, they would ask you to leave fairly quickly, and not in a very nice way. Which also happened to Werner Herzog when he went to the Central African Republic, working on a film about Bokassa. So there are moments and areas where role play is or going undercover, identity play is the only way of doing it.
And if you turn it around, it probably is also a way or a means of self-protection in those situations.
Yes, of course. It's also like a survival strategy, and a way of, in the theory of mirror neurons, that if you signify that you are up to something, that you have a certain gameplay, you do attract people who subscribe to the same fantasies, ideas that you are signifying, and then you will end up with a very extraordinary gallery of people.
And I'm talking about the Central Republic. In your second feature, The Ambassador, you put yourself pretty much at risk and also put your very life at risk. Is there a limit or a limit to what you'd risk for a role play and for a film to happen?
Definitely yes. There are there are no films worth anyone getting killed, myself included. The Central African Republic is a place where basically everyone are at risk. That is, default mode for everyone, and the only reality principle there is that there is really no reality principle. Anything can happen, from 1 hour or 1 minute to the next. So it's possible to predict what comes next. But I thought I went there first posing as a regular businessman to do research. Together with a scriptwriter who was posing as my secretary, and without not actually wanting to involve myself with anyone of importance, more a way of getting a feeling of the lay of the land in the capital Bangui. But within a few days, we were having meetings with the Minister of Mining Activities, discussing me purchasing mining concessions, because the whole system is geared towards facilitating and accommodating, sinister-looking, dubious businessmen. So that is, and if you carry yourself as such, and that is what I learned from doing Dates for Bush, that the only thing which is suspicious is the conventional point of view. The only thing which attracts suspicion if you try to blend in. Mm-hmm. But if you go the exact opposite way, the peacock method, behaving in a very flamboyant way, saying and doing outrageous things, people will tend to believe you are for real. Because and the last thing they will think is that you are some sort of an avant-garde film director from Scandinavia. That will not be on their mind.
But I can also imagine that, especially in The Ambassador, there must have been like some sort of point of no return when you were engaged into what was happening so deeply that you probably couldn't pull out without just walking the whole way.
Well, befriending the head of state security was a point of no return and a very decisive moment for the film. First of all, because he was such a cineastic and grotesque a character, a very obese former French Foreign Legion soldier from, I believe, Hungary. But he has also studied at the École de Guerre, the war college in Paris. He was an intellectual in many ways. And it was a bit like speaking with Marlon Brando as he appears in Heart of Darkness. And he was very much in the know about what really goes on in the Central African Republic and how the French are exploiting it, controlling it. And so having hidden recordings with him in my possession was something which kept me awake at night. And then later on, when he gets assassinated, was a hair-raising moment. Later on, that is not in the film, I learned the reason why he was assassinated was he was involved in planning a state coup himself. I think most people in the Central African Republic are, at one point or another, planning a state coup. Yeah.
And what I find interesting, there must have been moments, or probably several moments, of fear. How do you deal with fear while being in character?
Well, it's important to stress there were also moments of, enjoyment. Because when I go in character, I it's a bit like having lobotomy. I go all in, which it's a state of mind which basically is like being a borderline psychotic. So being in that state of mind and being my persona, I was really enjoying my life as a Liberian consul, meeting with diamond dealers, hanging out with one of the major diamond dealers, Monsieur Gilbert. I had my two pygmy assistants, driving around in Bangui in an SUV, high speed, with my pygmy assistants. All of this is very, basically fun, if you are in that state of mind. But a very uncomfortable moment was at a certain point in time when we were coming back from a nightclub for diplomats and businessmen. We were pulled over by a military patrol who who thought we were mercenaries. This was in the time of general elections coming up, and so they were more nervous than normal, and they thought we were mercenaries and took us to this police station, which if Dr. Frankenstein had been an interior decorator, it would have been that police station. And then we were interrogated by an officer in charge who was clearly on drugs, while the transistor radio was playing "I'm a Barbie Girl" with Aqua, and he was talking about transferring us to the central jail in Bangui, and if you go in there, you will not come out as a normal functioning human being, I think. But luckily, we asked if we could call a minister I had befriended, Excellency Gaston. And lucky for us, he was awake and he was not drunk. And he ordered us released immediately. And the next day, he called me and asked, either he asked if I wanted that police officer to be fired, but in fact, my feeling was he asked if I wanted him killed, and I said like no. So he was he helped us out.
And obviously, in your films, there's a lot of humor, even in the darkest of places. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about how humor is a device for you, a device of narration, maybe also gallows humor. Maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, there are filmmakers and also journalists who frown upon humor and comedy in journalism or in filmmaking, be it fiction or documentary, as a something which is seen as something vulgar or bad taste, not a sign of not being serious, and I do have issues with that. I feel laughter, being able to laugh, is something very essential about being human, and comedy is a great enhancer of tragedy, a way of underlining and emphasizing tragedy, and it's also very much needed in feature-length formats. Films, be it 90 minutes or longer, if there are no comic relief in it, it often becomes, impossible to survive or to get to the end of it.
So would you say that humor, in a way, also correlates with fear in your films?
It does, and it's a way of jerking people in and out of their comfort zones. But often, if you're dealing with something which is absolutely horrific, or a natural response, or maybe the only response, is laughter in a way. If things are black in black.
And in your latest film that premiered last night, Cold Case Hammarskjöld, I had the impression that especially the means of humor and also your identity play had in a way evolved, because it's a very serious topic, and you at some point in the film there's a break on your identity play.
Yes.
Why did you do that, and was that something you planned on doing, or did that just happen because of the findings you uncovered in that 7-year-long
yes.
investigation?
Well, when I fully realized the scale, depths, and seriousness of what I was working on, it dawned on me that I had to be very careful about using humor in the film, and then also at a certain point, making a clean slate, fully stating in a very honest way, what I had been doing up to that end or that point of no return. Because from there on, the film evolves into a horror film. So the first part of the film is me, goofing around, investigating, but not really getting anywhere, looking for the proverbial smoking gun, and so I thought also as a way of self-criticism, explaining about what I were doing, and then basically saying now it's a new ball game. Because otherwise people would be, justified saying, how can you make fun in a film which, in the end, points towards a possible black Holocaust?
And would you say that terms like truth and honesty, and maybe also the construction of reality, changed in making Cold Case Hammarskjöld?
Well, yes, it's being very. There is an honesty in being very visible and very present in your films, which, if done rightly, makes the audience, appreciate you fully declaring who you are and what you are up to, as a narrative device, compared to the fly on the wall method. It's also risky business, in Denmark we have a saying which is if you stick out your bottom, your temperature will get taken. So you have to be careful about exposing yourself. But I'm also and that was not the order of the day when we began working on this film, but now people are very much talking about fake news, the spread of conspiracy theories, and the lügepresse, in Danish we call it løgnepressen, and you could argue that I am in that sense a Spielverderber, that I am making the problem worse by actively exploring conspiracy theories, by actively rekindling fears of vaccinations, which is in the film. But what I think works at the end of the day in favor of the film is the honesty of the film, by fully explaining, this could be a very idiotic conspiracy theory. It could also be the biggest murder mystery, and also exposing your own faults and being honest about that.
And what would you say at this point of time, after having released the film like 6 months ago? Are you a believer of the conspiracy theory you are exploring in the film, or have you? Well, as I understand, your colleague Göran, who you've been working with, has continued the investigation on the case.
Yes, he's like a never-ending investigation machine, Göran. Well, when I began working with Göran, who is a private Swedish investigator who spends all his time investigating what happened with Dag Hammarskjöld when he was killed in a plane crash in 1961. It was considered, conspiracy theory for senior citizens. But then, while we were working on it, the UN reopened the case due to the new body of evidence. So in a strange way, it gradually became conspiracy reality. And soon the UN, the judge appointed to reinvestigate will publish his report. And as far as I understand it, it is leaning towards a conspiracy to kill Dag Hammarskjöld. At first, when I met Jørgen and began reading about what happened in Ndola in what was northern Rhodesia back in 1961, I had my doubts, and by instinct as a journalist, I am very careful about conspiracy theories because it is a kind of pornography for journalists, and in many ways, journalism is the opposite of conspiracy theory. But gradually, I became a believer or someone who feels comfortable to say that I am absolutely convinced that Dag Hammarskjöld was assassinated. But that is something you fully realize when you go to Ndola, when you are at the airport and when you study all the anomaly of the crash. For example, that the plane crashed 8 miles away from the airport. At nighttime, there was an enormous fire. Yet it took 15 hours before they officially discovered the wreckage. But when you learn about this and you meet the black witnesses who are still alive, it becomes very clear that something very mischievous happened back then.
But what made you want to go there and investigate yourself? Was that did you have beforehand, let me put that differently, did you want to go there to prove to yourself that you wanted to investigate that case, or whether you wanted to investigate the case, or where was the point where you were hooked on the case and wanted to see whether the conspiracy theory was true or not? Because maybe it could have been possible that you read about it and at some point just discarded the idea of continuing.
Yes. Well, no, it was while investigating, Jørgen went to an archive in Oxford, where he found pictures of when the wreckage was bulldozed into the ground at the airport next to the runway, and that was very interesting because officially most of the wreckage, so the story goes, was destroyed, burned, lost in the fire. But when you see these pictures, there are huge parts of the wreckage still left. And all of this was bulldozed into the ground. And through these pictures, Jørgen and I and the Swedish co-producer realized it would be fairly easy to triangulate where the wreckage is situated. So as a, MacGuffin, so to speak, we decided to go there to explore the possibility of digging up the wreckage, fully realizing that would probably not be possible. But to our surprise, the airport security manager, he had no problems with me and Jørgen digging right in the middle of the airport, next to the runway. But finally, we were told to stop because we were making arrangements for a bulldozer to arrive. And, we were pushing the envelope. So
that was, in fact, your personal MacGuffin as well, the point where you wanted to decide or choose whether you wanted to keep on investigating or not.
Yes, exactly.
And after the film having been released and the UN investigating again, did you have reactions from the countries that were in a way involved in the case? Has the film screened there? And if so, what were the reactions?
The film was screened recently in South Africa at the film festival in Durban, and it was also screened for former members of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as far as I understand it, they were very pleased with the film. One of the former members of the TRC said that, in fact, what is in the film did not come as a complete surprise to him. And another of the dignitaries, or persons present at the special screening, it was a screening for like old influencers. Is a South African judge, and she was a friend of General Tine Grunewald, who was in the film. He was head of military intelligence during the time of apartheid, and she said that basically General Grunewald was capable of anything.
Since we still haven't had any questions, I want to encourage you to take your chance. Yes, would you want to walk up to the microphone, please? I was asked to ask the audience.
About the last film, Cold Case Hammarskjöld, you show how you research some 6 years, and you make your methods quite clear, certainly not all open, but quite clear. When seeing the film, I was also thinking, do we commodify here the making of a documentary movie? There are certain things where I would say, okay, a reasonable documentary filmmaker would do this quite as a matter of routine, but it wouldn't become comedy. Let's say the two African black typists, you were dictating your report. So the film probably missed a lot of feedback from African people. So here you had 2 ways to get this feedback. And these people were hired for that purpose. So you hire 2, because if you can do it only with 1, she might just drop out or not be adequate for being used in the movie. So you had 2 excellent typists, and they gave you excellent feedback. So you put them both in, commodifying this approach, which otherwise looks to me very, very reasonable. Another example, when you came with the weird digging equipment to the airport to dig up what's remaining of Dag Hammarskjöld's plane. That's the method where I would say, okay, you told it yourself, that's your MacGuffin, let's see how they react. And the reaction is the important thing. And you make the comedy of showing up these nice white helmets and stuff. So you are going back and forth between doing reasonable research, like many documentary filmmakers would do, and a little bit Punch and Judy, a little bit comedy, which others wouldn't perhaps show.
Yes.
But it's a little bit with this new movie, like you also do comedy about the procedure of documentary filmmaking, perhaps.
Well, thank you. In many ways, I fully, subscribe to your analysis of the film, and I do oscillate between, in Danish we say oscillate between what you would call nuts and bolts investigative journalism, and then funny games, and that is a way of partly of making the film entertaining, but it's also a way of making in a way, a mockery of the true crime genre, the idea, this very infantile idea of a journalist who is on a quest for truth. Because what is truth, really? So that is at least my intention, and it was, in a way, perfectly timed that my film arrives at the apex of true crime. But that was not my intention, but the timing is really great. Regarding the two black typists, they are there for several reasons. One of them is that quite early on, I realized I was working on a film which would only contain elderly white men. There would be no women in the film, and furthermore, no black Africans in the film. So as a way of having women in the film, but also as a way of visualizing, colonialism in practice, as a way of gestalting interracial relations. I was, my ambition was that this could do the trick. But also, as you also stated, it's a way of having these two women are in many ways the avatars of the audience, and they did me a great service by asking absolutely excellent questions, which in many ways defined the structure of the film. It is a very, it was done in a very, cinema verite kind of way. So I did not write a script for them. I basically told them, now I will tell you a story and dictate narration as we go along. If you have questions, please ask them. And to my, immense satisfaction, they began asking brilliant questions. Yes.
Maybe follow. Oh, yes, please. Would you please step in front of the mic? I'm sorry. Probably it's not in front, but behind.
How did your approach to role-playing develop autobiographically? What are the roots in your own life to take these risks and to feel safe in the role and behind the mask?
Well, first of all, I don't consider Cold Case Hammarskjöld is not that much of a role-playing film. It does contain scenes with me acting out with costumes, but I am in character as such, as myself, more or less, whatever that is. But regarding role-playing, making people believe you are someone who you are not is actually very easy, because that is the basis of interhuman relations. That if I say that I am, a yoga teacher or a hairdresser or a sniper from the Israeli army, most people would tend to believe you. The important thing is what comes after that, crossing that line. And there you have to really develop and work on your character, your persona, and especially the small details. Does your persona smoke cigarettes? If so, what brand? If he or she, when you small talk, if you tell a joke, what kind of joke would that be? Because all of this is what makes a character come alive. Then I also work a lot on props. How you dress, what kind of stuff you carry around. Props are enormously important in films, and a prop chosen, carefully and rightfully can actually in some ways define a film.
Finally, were you inspired by the work of Günter Wallraff, for example? You know him?
Yeah, I know him. Yes, I do know and appreciate his work. He was, as a boy and a teenager, I saw a documentary about what he did in Karlsruhe at the steel mills there. I had what occurred to me a bit weird was how he was going undercover as a black person, because it really looked like blackfacing. and I think if he had done it today, he would be in dire straits. But compared to him, I do not, disguise myself. He very much tries to blend in. I am more about dressing up and acting out, if you should compare the two methods.
Hi, so far I've only seen Red Chapel, and I'm just amazed that in a time where there's internet, that your cover doesn't get blown. So I was wondering how, do you go as far as having forged papers, like for the ambassador, for example, or do you always have a backup plan in case somebody manages to pierce that, your
Yes.
identity? And also, second part of that question is, do you have a stack of aborted projects in your cellar where your cover did get blown, or where it just didn't live up to a whole documentary?
Thank you. Yes. Regarding, Google optimization for villains, I think, Googling everything is a side effect to doing journalism, making documentaries or films. Most people don't Google each other that much in general. You would be surprised if, on a fairly regular basis, I discover people who you would expect to Google, for example, my name, not doing that. Especially in North Korea, it's possibly only, I think, a handful of people who have internet access, maybe only one. But if they would have Googled my name back then, it would more or less check out. I was posing as a radicalized communistic theater director. If they would ask about me, they don't have an embassy in Denmark. They would have to, investigate fairly deep before they would find out that, he is not a communist after all, But regarding the ambassador, it was more, once I had purchased a diplomatic title, my papers were supposed to check out, and I did have my concerns about some of the diplomatic title brokers, how much they would investigate my background. But if you are, if you throw a lot of money around, people aren't that skeptical about who you are, actually. Regarding, failed or aborted projects, what remains are, in a way, a trauma for me was I worked for a long time on a film about finding Radovan Karadzic, the political leader of the Bosnian Serbs. He was like the, Osama bin Laden of Christian Europe, and was in hiding for many years somewhere in the Balkans. And I thought it would be very interesting, tracking him down. There were all sorts of colorful rumors about how he would travel at nighttime with a group of assassins protecting him and so on. And so I began my theory was if I could befriend the inner circle of Karadzic, they would initially, or eventually lead me to him. So on a regular basis, I travel to Belgrade to meet with these very shady and highly bizarre people. And in the end, finally, I had a quite, precise idea about where he was. I didn't have a street address, but, I was definitely closing in on him. And so right before we were to begin shooting the film for real, having secured, full funding because of our research results, they capture him. And I was in this uncomfortable situation, feeling depressed about a major war criminal being captured. And I couldn't explain, my sentiments to most people. But that was a very difficult time because I had been working on that for maybe 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid we are running out of time. Maybe you, since you just elaborated on aborted projects, tell us whether a new project is in the works, and maybe you probably cannot talk about it, but is there something in the works?
No, there is I am almost done shooting my next film. I have been working on it for approximately 8 years. It is a very secretive project, and I know it sounds. It's not to be pretentious that I say it's secretive. There really are reasons for that, and I think it will be possibly my best film ever. Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's a really high note we could end this talk on. Thank you, Mads Brügger,
Thank you, Sofia.
For being here. Thank you all for being here. And if you haven't seen Cold Case Hammarskjöld, there's 2 more opportunities, and one where you will also be able to talk to Mads again, which is tomorrow at 9:30 at Münchner Freiheit 2. And also The Ambassador will screen tomorrow at 7:30 at Atelier, and tonight at 10 o'clock you'll be able to watch Red Chapel at Atelier as well. Which I... Yes. And I'll encourage you to watch out of Mads' film, which are highly enjoyable and insightful at the same time. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.